So today we're going to talk about a concept in marketing that's a critical concept for entrepreneurs, and it's called the USP, Unique Selling Proposition. And what it stands for, it's the reason a product, excuse me, it's the reason a product or service is superior to competitors. It's something that is absolutely critical for entrepreneurs. Uh, it's probably, maybe I'll back up for a second. When you think about marketing, marketing's not like AI and some of the more complex areas of either business or engineering or science. It's relatively easy conceptually, but very difficult to implement. And the topic we're going to cover today, USP, Unique Selling Proposition, it'll be easy to understand, but very difficult to actually implement. And if you had a list, an area where a lot of entrepreneurs fail, it's because they don't have a USP. So I'm going to go through and explain the concept. I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to explain the difference between a feature and a benefit. And at the end, hopefully you have this concept. Next week, I'm also going to present, and we're going to talk about something called STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And it's related to USP. So I'll save that for next week, but it's also a critical concept. So the reason that you care about a USP is the following. It differentiates your offering from competitors. And if you have to look at a lot of entrepreneurial products and services, where they fail is they're not really differentiated. They're not superior to the competition. It provides a competitive advantage. And critically, it attracts customers. It's a reason for the consumer or customer to buy. It increases brand recognition, and it builds brand loyalty. All of those are key. And as we go through this, I'm going to explain what it takes to build a USP. And one of the areas the two areas I'm going to really emphasize are one, understanding the customer, and two, understanding the competitor. So here are the requirements for a USP. Buy this product or service for this benefit. And I'll come back to the word benefit in a minute. Second, the proposition must be unique. It has to be something different than what the competition is offering. And then lastly, you may have something highly differentiated, but nobody cares. And so it attracts new customers. So I'm going to pause for a minute because I've got to get a bottle of water. I'm losing my voice. I'll be right back. Sorry. Sorry. All right. So let's talk about the concept of a benefit versus a feature. A product feature is a characteristic of a product that describes its appearance, its components, its capabilities. I'll come back in a second and ask you a question about that. A product benefit is how a product satisfies a specific need of a customer. And one of the problems that, for example, engineers have is they're very focused on features, but not on benefits. So the way I think about a benefit is, what's in it for me? Why do I care? How is it going to help me? All right. So let's go through an example. I'm sorry. I'm out in Colorado. It's very dry and I lose my voice sometimes. You work for a PC manufacturer that emphasizes the speed of a processor. Is that a feature or a benefit? What do you think? Anybody want to answer that question? Okay. The answer is it's a feature. What does it produce? What does it generate? What's in it for me as a consumer? Well, the speed of a processor, let's say I'm a gamer, means I can play the game quickly, the game works seamlessly, and so on. So the speed of a processor is necessary, but not sufficient. It doesn't mean that it's going to produce a key benefit that the customer cares about. And numerous examples exist of people generating features that the customer doesn't really care about because it doesn't generate a key benefit. So the way I think about it is I start out with a feature, those are critical, but it produces a benefit. All right. You work for a toothpaste manufacturer and you emphasize that the toothpaste has fluoride. What's the benefit? What does it do? Do we care about fluoride? Now, this is an old example that you may not remember, but it's an excellent example of a company, Procter & Gamble, who used a feature, fluoride, generate a benefit, which I'll cover in a second, and it changed the market share. Crest toothpaste went from a second in the market relative to Colgate to number one, and a significant number one because of fluoride. But what fluoride did was it produced a key benefit. It decreased cavities for children. So you're a parent, and a major issue was cavities. Kids would go to the dentist, they hated it. The cavities produced pain when they were filled, and so on. So the idea of having a benefit, it decreased cavities, was critical. The means towards that end was fluoride. And so did anybody even know what fluoride was? No. But what did they care about? They cared about decay prevention, cavity prevention, and so that was the result. The feature is fluoride. The benefit is cavity prevention. Here are some of the information requirements, and I'm going to spend a second on this because this is really critical. What are the key benefits that your product or service offers? So we've just covered that. So as you're going through and thinking about, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm either in the nonprofit or the for-profit segment, and I want to ask myself, do I really have a benefit the customer perceives? And it's a key benefit that's going to differentiate my product. What is the customer chain for your product or service? Now, I use a term called the customer chain. I don't just talk about the customer because in many situations, it's much more complex than just a customer. Let's go back to our example of fluoride in toothpaste. Who was the customer? Well, you could say that the customer was the child who was getting the decay prevention, but really the decision maker was the parent, primarily probably the mother. And so it's not as simple as just saying there is an end user or a customer. There may be intermediaries who are critical to the process. If you're selling a product or service through a retailer, the intermediary is a retailer, but they're critical in terms of your ability to get the product to the consumer because you have to get shelf space or you have to get space in the retail store. So if you're a big packaged goods manufacturer or you sell liquor or whatever the product is, I was just somebody who was creating a new type of bourbon and they were talking to me about it. And the issue was, sounds great, but how are you going to get through the distribution system? How are you going to get through the retailer to the end user? The end user may love your product, but it becomes much more difficult to reach them. And something like bourbon may not be as easy to sell online as other products because of legal restrictions. So the customer chain is really critical. If you're selling an industrial product, you've got the user in the industrial firm, but you also have the decision maker who may be a purchasing agent. And so most people think about just the end user, but you've got to think about the intermediaries who are critical. And if I had to list an area that a lot of entrepreneurs fail, it's really failing to understand the customer chain. And in particular, understanding the degree of difficulty of the intermediaries who make impact whether your product reaches the end user, the consumer. The other area is understanding direct and non-direct competitors and what are their benefits versus your product. And this will sound a little negative, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs overstate the benefits of their product vis-a-vis the competition. And what that means is that you underestimate the competition in terms of what they're providing, and the consumer doesn't look at the product the same way you do. So that's why consumer research is so important, to go back and understand what the customer thinks about your product, not just what you think about it. And so this is a critical requirement in terms of, sorry, in terms of being able to reach the market. When you look at many products, and I could go through a long list of them, and you think about the number of competitors out there, there's both direct and indirect competitors. Direct competitors are people that do it exactly the way you do it, but there may be indirect competitors who are producing a product that's similar to what you're doing, but they do it a different way. They may use different channel of distribution, meaning they may go direct and you go through retailers, or you may go direct and they go through retailers. And so you've got to think about not only what are the direct competitors, but the indirect competitors. Questions to be answered in creating a USP. The first is, who is the target audience? And we're going to talk about that more next week, because we're going to talk about STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Who is the target audience for your product or service? What is the problem being solved? What are you doing in terms of, why do I care? What differentiates your product or service? What is the promise to a target audience? And then, can the target audience evaluate the product or service on this key benefit? And does the product or service deliver on this key benefit? I produced a couple of videos for you to be able to also review, and they're short. They're 3 to 7 minutes each, and there are 2 of them in terms of USP. One of the examples I use is the airlines. And actually, there's an interesting example going on right now with Southwest Airlines. And I don't know whether you fly Southwest or not. Southwest had a fairly unique position in the marketplace. When it started, it was a low-cost carrier. It actually just serviced Texas. And it went from the big 3 cities in Texas, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston, that triangle. And then it added other cities like El Paso. And then it started to go more nationally. But their model was totally different. It was a very low-cost carrier. You didn't have seating, so I didn't say I want seat 3C. What you did was you lined up based on when you ordered your ticket, and then you walked into the plane and grabbed a seat. So they didn't need a lot of sophisticated software to manage the seating in the airline. They were very low cost. They didn't have a hub system and so on. So they had something really unique, and they promised you low prices. Well, recently they just changed, and they're now going to allow seating and so on. So the question is this really differentiated from United, American, Delta, et cetera? And the answer probably is they've decreased their differentiation relative to the competition. Now, the problem was that they were having issues with people getting upset about not getting seats when they got on. They had had a ticket late and so on. So they're trying to look more like the other airlines. Is that a good strategy? We'll see. To me, it's not a good strategy because they're now an undifferentiated player. If you look at United Airlines, and that's one of the examples I use, they say we're going to fly the friendly skies. Can they deliver on that benefit? Are they friendly skies? You get on a plane, it's basically a cattle call. You're sitting next to somebody who is taking the middle seat, and it's unpleasant and so on. And they're saying you're going to fly the friendly skies. So what you promise the customer or the consumer depends upon, can you deliver on that promise? Easy to make promises. And we're going to talk about this next week when we talk about something called positioning, because many products and services have a promise, but their ability to deliver on it is very limited. This is a map that I use. It's abstract for this. Next week, I'll have an actual physical example of it for a company. It's going to be Vanguard. But the idea behind it is that we can map where everybody's product and service is. When Dave Mawhinney and I taught marketing for entrepreneurs, we use this in pricing. And the reason we used it in pricing was, where are you vis-a-vis the competition? If you don't have a superior benefit or you're a lower price, you're going to have a lot of difficulty in the market. Now, in this example, we've got benefits. So going back to our toothpaste example, the benefit was decay prevention. Where were the competition? Now, other people had benefits like the taste was better or it got rid of bad breath. And so the question is, where is everybody positioned? And what you want to do is you want to be here where the new entrant is, where there is a hole in the market, where there aren't competitors. So it's very important to draw this map and ask yourself, where are you vis-a-vis the competitors? It forces you to think about what are the benefits you're offering? Where is the competition vis-a-vis these benefits? And if you can do consumer research and get consumers to answer this or customers to answer it, it's much better than your own personal evaluation. Because as I said before, you're likely to personally evaluate a product or service on a different level than the competition. And what you're going to do is you're going to overstate what you think your benefits are, and the consumer or customer may not recognize those benefits to the same extent you do. Going back to the airlines, I can promise you that we're going to fly the friendly skies, but in reality, they aren't friendly. What does the consumer think, and where are you positioned vis-a-vis the consumer? And if you look at somebody like American Airlines, they're doing very poorly in terms of customer evaluation. Yet, if you talk to management, they'll tell you how wonderful their airline is. We've got great employees, et cetera. The question is, how does the consumer think about this? So here's some discussion questions. And we're going to try to do this online, but I hope I can get somebody to participate and answer. What do you think the USP is for an Apple Watch? Does anybody want to volunteer? I'll throw some out. Integrated. It's integrated with the Mac system or the Apple system. So my Apple Watch integrates with my laptop, with my tablet, and so on. Is that a USP? Is that a benefit? It has significant information associated with health. Is that the USP? Now, compare that to a Samsung and the Android system. Is it differentiated? I'll let you think about that. Give you another one. Tesla. What's its USP? All right, I'm going to ask one last question. Have their USPs eroded over time? Are there competitors to Tesla? If we look at China and we look at Tesla, what do we see? We see a competitor that's really outstripping Tesla in terms of its lower price. It's Tesla's the premium brand in China, but there's a lower cost competitor who has much higher market share and is selling something like 3 million vehicles a year. So as you develop a USP, competitors start to react and they start imitating you. And if you're not careful, your USP declines over time. Now, somebody like Apple has a unique system where they have customers who love the integrated system and so on, so they are relatively brand loyal. But its USP compared to, say, a Samsung watch isn't very significant in terms of the features that it offers. The benefit is the critical issue. I'll ask you one more question, and maybe we can, I can turn off the slideshow and we can open it up for questions. What is Tepper's USP? Does Tepper have a USP? So why don't I'm going to turn off the slideshow. This is my last slide, and I'm going to open it for questions. What do you think? Does Tepper have a USP? All right, I'm going to put you on the spot, Leah. What do you think?
Yeah, well, according to Bloomberg, one of our top USPs actually is Tepper's strength in entrepreneurship. We're in the top 3.
Okay, I'm going to challenge it a little and say, is that a feature or a benefit?
That is a feature.
Right. What's the benefit?
Well, the benefit of it would be if I want to be an entrepreneur, I can get out of Tepper, better equipped than other students from other business schools.
Correct. And so the benefit is that I'm going to have significant assistance in setting up my venture. I'm going to learn the processes so that when I leave Tepper, I'm ready to go in terms of the marketplace because I've been trained through various courses and so on to learn how to think as an entrepreneur. And then it increases the chances that I'll be successful in the business. But having an entrepreneurship program is much more of a feature. What about more broadly besides just entrepreneurship? Does Tepper have a USP or could it? So I'm a Tepper graduate from many moons ago. And when I went to Tepper, what it offered a unique education in terms of much more quantitative, sophisticated, evolving ways that business was going to address the marketplace. And so that's the reason that I chose Tepper. And I think it delivered on that promise. That in fact, only MIT and Carnegie were really schools, and maybe to some extent the University of Chicago, who were really focused on quantitative business schools that were going to be the new wave of how business was going to be run. Now the question is, does Tepper still deliver on it, or could it? And the answer is, I think it could. And I think in many respects, if we drew that product map, quantitative versus qualitative, and avant-garde versus not avant-garde, Carnegie's in a relatively good position, or Tepper's in a relatively good position in terms of the marketplace. Now, can it deliver on that promise? And what is the benefit, not just that I have these features, that the students graduate with a different kind of education can be a real benefit. So I'll open it up if there are any questions or issues that you'd like to raise. Do we all understand the concepts? And these slides are available to you.
Okay, you want to come up? We have a question in the room.
All right.
He's coming up.
My question is fairly simple. So, how many USPs do you need? Is one enough? And like, how many USPs are too many USPs?
The answer is one, and one's hard to develop. All right. I mean, obviously, if you have other ways you've differentiated your product or service in terms of benefits, that's terrific. But most companies have at most one. And you can also think about nonprofits having one. I've been involved heavily in nonprofits in Colorado, where I live part of the year. And I have an example that I was going to use of something that was a differentiated product in terms of financial services. And it was something called High 5-Year Life. And it was a product that was developed by an entrepreneurial nonprofit director. And what it does, and I'll talk a little about this next week, it provides a complete financial evaluation of the kind of career that you want to take. And there's really nothing like it in the marketplace. And it's very beneficial both to parents and students. And so you can have a USP for nonprofits as well as for-profits. The examples are almost always for-profits because they're easier to talk about. But nonprofits, in fact, it's just as important for a nonprofit. How do you differentiate a nonprofit versus a for-profit?
I do have a follow-up question on this as well. So like we have this one USP, but what if the competitor attacks us on like this one USP? Maybe they get a similar product because they're already established. It's not very difficult for them to attack us on this. And how does one battle that out or like get out of that situation?
So the examples I used of Tesla and of Apple Watch, competitors have caught up. to some extent. Tesla's still a fairly unique company, but BMW and everybody now has electronic or EVs and so on. And as I said, in China, they've come in at a different price point as well, meaning lower priced and a broader marketplace. The answer is you have to keep. Ideally, what you do is you anticipate that competition is going to come in and you say, what's my second move? How can I continue to differentiate? What you want to do, and in marketing, they emphasize this heavily, you want to grab that position in the marketplace so the competitor isn't thought about for that product. So going back to Crest and toothpaste, everybody ultimately imitated with fluoride in toothpaste, but everybody in the marketplace thought of Crest as the one that prevented cavities because they advertised it and communicated it. And in the consumer's mind, they thought of Crest and cavity prevention. So to the extent that you can have captured we call it the positioning in the marketplace, and the consumer thinks of your product or service as unique, and the competition, when I think about X, I think about you, not the competition. So advertising and communication can help. The other is trying to anticipate that and say, what's the next version of the product so I can leapfrog the competition? Easy to say, hard to do.
Those were my questions. Thank you.
Other questions I can answer?
We have one coming up.
Hi, Bob. Thank you
How
for
are
the
you?
presentation. So going back to your point about it's easy to understand but difficult to implement. As a new entrepreneur, if you're starting out your company, you spoke about talking to customers. What kind of questions should you ask to understand if what your USP is, and how do you know once you've identified a USP that this is the USP that's going to work for you?
That's a good question. Let's start by going back to the two key areas I emphasized, understanding the customer chain and understanding the competition. So to determine whether you really have a USP, what you want to do is you want to talk to prospective customers and see what they think. And the way to start is to talk to friends and people you know, but that's not enough. They often won't tell you, gee, that's a terrific idea. Whoops, wait a minute. I don't see, why would I want to buy it? I have a quick example. I have somebody that I know pretty well who developed something on a phone where you could attach it to the wall. All right. How unique is that? Not at all. I mean, every time I turn around, somebody else has one of those. His friends told him it was terrific. So you have to be very careful about who you talk to. So step one is to talk to people you know, get their reaction to it, and push them on, tell me all the things that are bad about the product. So you have to ask the negative, not necessarily the positive. Secondly, then you have to go out and, you can go to bars, you can go to restaurants, or places that people meet. One example that Dave and I use is for a product aimed at young mothers. They interviewed people at Starbucks, because there were a lot of young mothers in the late morning, early afternoon who just wanted to get out of the house and went to Starbucks. So how do I find, using what we call a convenience sample? And then if you're lucky enough, you then do some kind of a survey. Today, online helps, and you can show the product or service. You have to be a little careful because competition will also be looking at it.
Right.
And then whether you know it, that depends upon, one, your ability to look at where the competitors are. So I don't know what your product or service is, but you definitely want to have consumers or customers or prospective customers evaluate you versus the competition. And you have to keep pushing them on, give me the negatives. I know that seems strange, but if I ask you the positives, you tell me, oh, I know you well, you're really a smart guy, I love your product. And the answer is, well, tell me all the reasons why it might not work.
Yeah.
And understanding the competition is really critical. I developed a product in the 80s. I hate to admit how old I am. which had an AI component to it. And it was really an expert system aimed at the direct marketing industry. And I did not do enough research on the competition. And when we presented it, it was far superior to anything you could do in Excel. But everybody just kept talking to us about, well, Excel doesn't cost much. I could do this in Excel. They couldn't come close to doing it in Excel, but they didn't understand that. And we didn't do a good job of communicating it. And they didn't really understand the benefits. We were too focused on the features. And we sold some, but it never was a very successful software product. Sounded great. I got investors and so on, the story. And then it just didn't do very well. It was disappointing, and it was a terrific product, but it was too advanced. People didn't understand it. We didn't do a good job of communicating the benefits. And if we had done a better job of understanding the competition and how the customer thought about it, we might have been more successful.
Got it. Awesome. So you ask for the negatives, you understand the competition, and you also ask your customers to compare your product to the competition and get
Right.
feedback too.
And it's and you got to just keep looking at the negatives. I hate to keep saying that, but that's the only way. It's the only way you're really going to start to assess what do people really think. You got to push them on. Yeah, I mean, I know you like my product, but here's a competitive product. Explain why I'm better than you or better than it. So,
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. So
thank you.
Any other questions in here? Any questions online? Yeah, I don't have any more questions in the room and nobody's muting online. So,
All right.
but do you have anything else, Bob, or we'll end it and see you next week?
See me next week. And all I want to emphasize is just remember competition and customer chain. So I'll be Johnny One Note, as they call it.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this, and we will see you next week.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.